That's a very good point. That's a very good point. The responsibility should, I mean, if you don't tell students what it means, then you can't really blame them for seeking answers elsewhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I have a chapter in my book about the exploitation of quantum mechanics by non-scientists. But I mean, when you see what people have been saying, um, it is really not. You can't blame the non-scientists for what they or the philosophers for what have been saying by then saying about quantum mechanics, given what has been said by scientists. I think that's as simple as that. And I think the students can be forgiven, certainly forgiven, for being confused about the whole thing because nothing clear is being told. And I say, you see, as I say, the physicists now are not as dogmatic as they used to be, but uh, they don't bother to try to really have a clear picture. So they can say, oh, but maybe it's many words, that's all. I mean, maybe it is, maybe that. You see, and because they don't think it's true, the students don't know. You see, I think I say in my book that there should be at least three things that should be said. One is that there is a problem with quantum mechanics. It's not clear what it means. That's the minimum that you should do. The second thing is non-locality, because that's a theorem. Okay, it's not. I mean, it's not something which you can speculate about. And then explain that Bohm is a solution. Now, of course, people will say, "Oh, we don't like Bohm." Okay, you don't like Bohm, fine, but what do you like? I mean, what is your alternative? Okay, I mean, it's like on Facebook. I mean, it's just like many words. I mean, they don't like many words, but it seems to me that people, yeah, these are the three steps which I think an honest teacher should do. Anyway.
Like is a subjective judgment that doesn't.
Yeah, yeah. The question, no, I think, but anyway, I don't know if the situation will improve. I'm not very optimistic because I don't think, you see, there is always the problem that people need to make careers. There is zero reward for even asking those questions. Very bright people who have been working in foundation of quantum mechanics, like Ward Streif, can't find a job. And I mean, not only him, but others. And I find that's a pity. You see, there is not even a 1% of jobs which are attributed to these kind of things. And they have to find jobs in philosophy or maybe in mathematics department, physics department. It's very, very difficult to find a job. Um, you know, I think I don't know how many people actually work in mathematics departments who are working on. I mean, Detlef was in mathematics. His students that I know are in mathematics. Shelley is in mathematics. Shelley Goldstein is in mathematics. Maudlin is in philosophy. Physics department, but it's strange because then of course, it's also very funny because it's, oh, we don't care. We only worry about applications, so on, so. And then they start discussing the early universe. Okay, what's the application of the early universe? Okay, I don't know. or the, whether the universe expands and contracts and all these things. I mean, what's the application of that?
No, you bring this up, but it's very true. People who dismiss the philosophical questions the most end up asking them casually without discipline.
Well, they ask questions which are, if not philosophical, I mean, they have to. I mean, for example, I don't agree, for example, that Bohmian mechanics is philosophy. I think Bohm wrote a completely physics paper, and Bell wrote physics paper, and the papers by Goldstein, Zangi were physics paper, etc. I mean, I think this is complete physics paper. What I might call philosophy is, but what is the status of the wave function? Is it a law, or and what's the status of quantum equilibrium? Is that a law, or is that a, what is the nature of laws? Do you take a Jungian view on laws, which I don't, but or more the approach of Maudlin, which I do. I mean, you see, this is then I would say I call that philosophy. But I don't think you need to do the philosophy to. I, in my book, there are certain chapters on philosophy which I've added because it's part of the discussion, but you could take them out and just leave everything with the equations and so on, and that would be a physics book, in my opinion, but of course people will say, that's philosophy, boom, that's philosophy. No, it's not philosophy, it's just understanding what you're talking about.
What do you think the role of philosophy is then?
Oops. Uh, well, I mean, maybe you won't like it, but Weinberg, of course, says that before the invention of the postal service, the whole of the nation state was to protect you from other nation states. I'm not sure that's true, but then he says the whole of philosophy is to protect yourself from other philosophies, from bad philosophies. And in a sense, I think it's partly true. In particular, protect yourself from idealistic philosophies, which are extremely common among philosophers, especially continental philosophers. But it seemed to me that it just also just clarifying concept. You see, I mean, it all depends. If you call Bohm philosophy, then Bohms are useful to clarify your concept. Now, I don't know. I don't have a fixed definition of what philosophy means. It seems to me I've always been interested in philosophy. By the way, I've read lots of philosophy, but probably more than most physicists. But I would not, you see, I wouldn't start with philosophy. I start with physics and then you reflect. I mean, it's the book by Maudlin, The Metaphysics Within Physics. I mean, you start with physics and then you reflect upon that in order to think about the status of laws and things like that. The good philosophy, at least since Newton would, I mean, at least I'm not talking about ethics and things like that, but philosophy is philosophy of nature, everything that's about ontology and metaphysics and so on starts with physics. Okay, and then of course you can start to think beyond what the physicists usually think about. Physicists usually don't think about the nature of space and time. You see, it's okay for physicists to take a naive attitude with respect to space, time, and these things, and just take the equations. And it would be okay for them to do the same thing in quantum mechanics if quantum mechanics made sense, but the usual thing does not make sense. And then, of course, you need to go beyond. But if you take the Bohm theory, then of course it's a physics theory. It just completes ordinary quantum mechanics, and that's it. But then you can go beyond and ask philosophical questions.
But like, Maudlin, for example, as best as I can tell, constantly emphasizes philosophy, mathematics, and physics. But sometimes I kind of feel like it's kind of like the scientific method, where we can have a nice description of what it is, but in practice, it's very difficult to draw lines. Um, and I'm not so sure there's really any point in drawing lines either, right?
Yeah, I don't think my friend Sokal had once a diagram with a line, you see, going from, of course, where he puts all the different theories. So he takes, for example, on the one hand, on the one extreme, you can have atomic theory, for example, which is well established. But then you can have string theory, which is somewhere in between. I'm not even sure where it is nowadays, but no, it's not at the end of the spectrum. And of course, on the other hand, he would put pseudoscience, homeopathy, and all the religions at the other end, okay, with no things with no empirical support. But there is a continuum. I mean, there is no demarcation as the positivists would have liked or Popper would have liked to have between science and pseudoscience, especially because there's a lot of I think there's a lot of pseudoscience in what we call science. I mean, there's a sociological definition of science, which is what people do in the science department, but whether that fits any philosophical demarcation line, that I doubt.
What is your view of the positivist and the demarcation problem?
Well, again, it's a guide, you see, it's a guide. You don't have a fixed demarcation, but of course, if your theory, I mean, it's like this big thing about Popper, whether it's falsifiable. Obviously, it has to be falsifiable in some way, but of course, what counts as a falsification is very complicated. You could say Newton's theory has been falsified by the perihelion of mercury in the 19th century. Nobody gave up Newton's theory for that reason, okay? The question is whether, because there was a lot of empirical support, and so that's why I think Popper is totally misguided. And the positivists, of course, they thought there was a question of meaning, but the meaning is, I certainly don't think the meaning are the means of verification. Meaning is a complicated notion, but I certainly don't think one can reduce it to, you know, the means of verification. So I don't have a demarcation line. As I say, there's a continuum between complete mystical pseudoscience, etc., and well-established science.
Do you think it's just a matter of time, or like, because I imagine that that if you have such a view that's so far off from reality, you don't believe in objective reality, those research programs won't lead anywhere. Like they'll end up failing. Well, so would the internal failure of these approaches maybe make a change somewhere down the road?
But it's difficult to know because you see, once you have this department, the department hire who they want, and of course, I don't expect a feminist studies, a women's studies department to hire somebody who has very strong views on biological differences between men and women, for example. I mean, I don't have strong views. That's not my field. But I mean, it's obvious that they are going to hire people who have this, who share their, just like in physics. I mean, if you don't hire somebody who believes in astrology, okay? So they don't hire somebody who doesn't share their belief system. But of course, they produce papers which are, they do have a paradigm, to use Kuhn's expression, and each of these departments have their own paradigms, and then it's very difficult to, because if you attack from outside, then they say, "Oh, you are not part of the club, so you don't know what you're talking about." That's what the reaction to Sokal and me. And then, of course, and inside, nothing changes because the paradigm reproduces itself. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. What?
Yeah, I mean, I like I understand the idea of shifting into a more practical critique. Like I did a podcast with James Robert Brown, who's a philosopher. I keep going on about this on this podcast, but he wrote a book on the science wars and all that. But he brought up a point that was very salient, which was that a lot of people have shifted criticism away from criticizing the fact of science, saying this is subjective, it is objective, to criticizing the institutions themselves, to
Yeah, I know.
just making
I
a
heard that.
point about
I heard that.
diversity
I
and
listened to him. I listened to the few. I did. I listened to the. I didn't listen to the whole podcast. I was listening to Craig Callender just before talking to you, but I listened to him and the few minutes about postmodernism. I thought it was very optimistic. I don't know if that's true because I remember a discussion. I don't know if it was with Collins or Barnes and Bloor, but there was a discussion once. We had several encounters after the book. For example, in Germany, in Bielefeld, there was a conference and with sociologists and people like us. And in one of the discussions, I said it would be useful if you were able to give criteria to distinguish between science and pseudoscience, you see. But of course, they would have to deal with the science, but maybe you can help with sociological criteria for that or something like that. But that they didn't want to do. They didn't have any interest in doing that. They were wanting to prove that the whole of science is a social construct. Back then, they may have changed their mind now, but I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there was obvious. I mean, we had discussion with Latour, with this sort of the French analogues, but these more sort of, you know, uh, how can I say? I mean, he's less serious. From the outside, he looks like serious than the British and analytical. I mean, we're more in the analytical tradition. Okay, so he could say something and then contradict himself and so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, it seemed to me that these people just wanted to undermine the privilege of science. And I'm not even sure what the agenda was, because of course you could have a hidden agenda, so to speak, or often not so hidden agenda to put forward to, to promote religion, for example, or to promote your favorite superstition or something like that, or to promote political views. But it wasn't clear to me at all what they had, if they had any secret agenda. They were just, I don't know.